Well, let's hear what independent analyst Khaya Sithole has to say about that. He's written an opinion piece, by the way, questioning whether President Cyril Ramaphosa is being undermined. He's also shared his opinion on South Africa's credibility in the global sphere. Khaya joins us now on the line. Good to have you, Job, and thank you very much for your time. South Africa trade relations with Washington, robust, strong, but yeah, pretty much still intact. Would you agree?
Good evening, and good evening to the viewers. So, yeah, I mean, the developments of the past 24 hours have been quite problematic. So, before today happened, I had essentially wrote a piece that sort of looked at how delicate and how problematic South Africa's relationships with the world have become since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia last year. And I think the crux of the problem here is that South Africa's diplomatic position has become quite problematic for a lot of observers, in the sense that when the Ukraine crisis started, a lot of countries like South Africa took the position that they wanted to be neutral. In other words, they were not going to condemn Russia, but they're not going to support Russia, which is a position that you can justify, particularly given the geopolitical standpoint where we were. But I think in recent months, it's become very clear that South Africa's position of neutrality is actually no longer a position of neutrality, but rather a position of embracing Russia. So the question that I was raising is whether South Africa has made peace with the fact that such undertakings, such diplomatic positions do come with consequences. Yeah. And I don't think South Africa at this point in time has made peace with the fact that, look, in as much as you might want to take a particular position, you must also acknowledge what the consequences are going to be. So what we now know is that South Africa is already starting to try and reckon with those consequences. They have sent a team of envoys to the United States to try and explain South Africa's position on Russia, with the understanding that if that position is not explained, there will be economic consequences. And that is essentially the dilemma that we found ourselves in, where our political considerations and the economic consequences are simply not matching up.
Yeah. Is the United States response based on principle, or are we once again seeing maybe them being a little bit irritated because of the global economic and policy order that many are saying is realigning and their dominance is being shaken at the moment?
So there's a couple of dimensions in this particular one, and none of them are very straightforward. The first question is the question of the United States in particular regards itself as a global superpower. Russia would like to be a global superpower. China regards itself as a global superpower. So these are the existing realities of our time. And in the diplomatic circles, what one needs to be able to try and find is the right balance between managing those relationships against those competing and oftentimes contrasting superpowers. And what South Africa has done very well in the past 10 to 12 years in particular is really manage those diplomatic channels in a manner that enables them to be a member of BRICS, which is obviously dominated by Russia and China, and also become the type of global economic gateway to Africa that enables us to be embraced by the G7 in particular and the G20 on a much wider basis. So South Africa has mastered that diplomatic tightrope quite well over the years. What seems to have been the problem is that in the past 12 to 15 months, South Africa seems to have lost its way in how to manage that. So how do you manage to maintain strong relations with Russia without actively endorsing the aggression that they had in Crimea in 2014 and the aggression that they had in the Ukraine in 2022? And also be able to say to countries like the United States that, look, we are a sovereign country that is well within our means to decide who we are friends with, but we're obviously not going to embrace the enemies. So that seems to be the tightrope that South Africa has been grappling with. What seems to have been the problem in recent days is that South Africa now seems to be embracing the Russian dimension of this, which simply means that to other countries that, look, guys, we're not going to stop you from embracing Russia, but the consequences of you embracing Russia X, Y, Z. And South Africa is now trying to then manage it by saying, oh, wait, hold on, we can explain ourselves. So we know a couple of weeks ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa sent an entire team to the United States, led by Sidi Mufamadi, to say to the United States, look, guys, even though this is a position that we seem to be taken on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, this is how we can explain ourselves. And unfortunately, that position is no longer as tenable as it used to be quite a while before. So the developments of today actually only escalated the crisis, because for the United States ambassador to come out and say that, look, not only South Africa it falsely claiming a position of neutrality, they're actively supporting the war in the sense that they've sent weapons to Russia to attack the Ukraine. That became a game changer, because now suddenly whatever veneer of neutrality that we've been promoting as a country cannot be justified in light of what was said today. And the problem here is that South Africa hasn't come out and said, oh no, this is all a misunderstanding, we haven't done such a thing. South Africa has come out and said that, well, actually, we're going to find a different way to explain it.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, you would think the president sitting where he's sitting, there's the National Convention Arms Control Committee, it has quarterly reports that it sends to Parliament. It would know that if arms were actually sold in this country or not. It's a very simple answer to say, yeah, we did, or no, we didn't. But I see the president playing this game that he likes to play with South Africans. I don't know if it will work with the United States of saying, no, let's let processes take its course. I've put a committee together, it's investigating. Does the United States have the patience for that?
No, they don't. And the problem here is that from what you've seen in the statement that has been released by the presidency, this was a matter that was pending that they were aware of. What they seem to be objecting to is the way in which the United States decided to publicize this in saying that, well, actually there is this pending crisis where we've been asking questions and we haven't been getting the answers. So the bigger issue here is that clearly there must be a straightforward answer in that whether it was 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago when the first question was asked, did you supply arms to the Russian ship? The answer should have been very clear, yes or no. The fact that they then said that, look, we don't know what the answer is, but we're going to engage in the process of appointing someone to interrogate that, it unfortunately doesn't assist the South African situation because a lot of citizens here now will be like, well, surely, guys, if you didn't do it, the answer will be very straightforward. So clearly the answer is not as linear as you and I would like it to be. And the bigger problem here is that then, well, actually, now that you knew that this matter was pending, what was the master plan should the United States either directly leak the information, either directly state it or somebody leaks the information, because it is difficult for us to then reconcile how our own government seems to have been caught unaware that there was a possibility that somebody might say that actually there is a pending conversation about this. So the reaction even now indicates that this is a country that doesn't have a very strong element of control over how it manages its crisis moment and how it manages its diplomatic crisis moments, because today the answer should have been very straightforward that, look, well, actually we didn't do this, but the United States think that we did do it, so therefore this is why we've actually undertaken this particular activity. Yeah. So all the answers that we got to do is to say, well, actually this is part of the pending conversation where we don't know what the answer is, and you have to ask the question, well, you had arms the day before, whether it was 10,000, bombs, whatever the answer was. The day after, did you have the same? Because if you had the same the day after, then nothing went wrong. If you don't know what happened the day after, then you've got a problem.
The U.S. saying to us, well, remember, you get $21 billion just by the duty-free area that we have created for you. How significant is that? And I mean, is that a serious, clear threat to say you could lose this in the economy of South Africa?
Oh, no. So the biggest problem that South Africa has is the conflict between the ANC policy stance on geopolitical issues and South Africa's primary interests on geopolitical issues. It is very clear that the ANC has got a much stronger relationship with Russia and China and all these, communist countries, Venezuela and Cuba, for example. The ANC has got a much stronger relationship. That relationship doesn't always translate to the most optimal outcomes for South Africa at large. And I think the tension points that we always have to navigate here is whether when the ANC, in its position as a governing party, takes particular positions in relation to these countries, whether those positions are in the best interest of the country at large. And that seems to be the biggest dilemma that we have here. So if you remember a couple of weeks ago when President Cyril Ramaphosa then said that, look, we've decided to withdraw from the ICC in response to this problem because the ICC says, well, South Africa, you've got a responsibility to execute an arrest warrant because you, as the country, are a member of this ICC. The ANC then says, well, actually, we'd like to withdraw. But then the president of the country says that we're going to withdraw, not noticing that that was an ANC position rather than a country's position. That was the most explicit illustration of the problem that we have here. So until South Africa finds an element of convergence between what the ANC's interests are versus what the country's interests are, we're going to have this particular problem. And this is now how it plays out, when clearly the ANC's interests in the alignment with Russia are not the same as South Africa's interests, where South Africa's primary interest must be economical, and then the ANC's interests are definitely political.
Yeah. Let's come to the credibility question. Magda, I'm sure you've seen her. She was on earlier on here with my colleague Xolim Gambi. She says, as far as investors are concerned, South Africa is a non-entity. We are no longer really even looking at South Africa. It's irrelevant to us. Clearly, the approach that the president is now taking, to me, says he still wants to be part of the G7s, the G20s. Is he likely still going to get an invite there? Does he still have any credibility with those guys?
Look, so South Africa will never ever be a member of the G7. I mean, the membership of the G7 just takes so many other hurdles to conquer. In fact, the G7 has only ever accepted one member since 1976, and that was Russia, whom they accepted in 1997, and they only excluded them in 2014 when they annexed Crimea. So we're never going to be members of the G7. What tends to happen is that the G7 then has this expanded mandate where they seek to embrace other countries that they regard as strategically important. So the idea of the G20 is essentially born from that concept. And South Africa has been regarded as a critical member in relation to its position in Africa, where we are the most advanced economy, and people have legitimately said that we are getting into the African continent up until now. So those invitations are on the basis of that. South Africa's problem, unfortunately, is that its economic fundamentals do not actually warrant or justify a position in either the BRICS alliance, which is just a group of 5 countries. Even in the G20, we actually don't have the legitimacy to be there, the economic legitimacy to be there, and the only reason we've been able to be part of that is due to the geopolitical considerations. What seems to be the new problem is that we've now even squandered that. We've now sacrificed that geopolitical strategic point by us fighting, or at least embracing Russia in this particular conflict, because even the BRICS alliance itself has to legitimately ask the question that, well, these guys were not here because of their economic fundamentals. They were here because of how geopolitically, strategically important they were. Well, that's no longer the case because of the wrong position that they've taken, or the difficult position that they've taken here. So what justifies their continued membership of even the BRICS alliance? So when you talk about the legitimacy problem, it's really on the basis that, well, actually after this conflict ends, when questions get asked about who should be part of the structures and who shouldn't, South Africa is going to struggle to leverage its geopolitical standpoint, strategic importance, because its economic fundamentals are so weak. We're going to struggle to justify why any of these particular alliances should continue to embrace us.
So where should the cookie crumble? I mean, where should we fall? Should we continue to be lightweight in BRICS? Or continue to be lightweight in AGOA and at least get 20 billion US dollars?
Look, I think based on what happened today, you can legitimately say that AGOA is not going to be a thing beyond 2025. So we do know that later this year, there's going to be an AGOA summit that's supposed to be in South Africa. Now, that AGOA summit, unfortunately, happened a few weeks after the BRICS summit. If in the BRICS summit, Putin does land in the country and South Africa does not actually arrest them, it will make it very clear that the United States in particular will lobby for the exclusion of South Africa from the AGOA forum. And that has economic consequences for South Africa at large. Once South Africa loses access to the very lucrative United States market, which we must say is multiples of billions in comparison to its access to the Russian market in particular. Once South Africa loses that, we've actually lost the economic war. Will we retain the geopolitical war? Well, based on how we behave right now, you probably also aren't going to see a very strong case for us remaining a geopolitically, strategically important alliance for all of these organizations. So unfortunately, the events of the past few weeks, and specifically the events of today, have got much longer and very catastrophic consequences for the country unless something different emerges over the next couple of hours or even the next couple of days. This is essentially the crisis moment for South Africa's economic and geopolitical future.
Independent analyst Khaya Sithole, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on there and giving us that intervention.